Here we go. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, I'm so excited to be with you.
Do you know you were episode 100 back in the day, and we're on, I think, like episode 330 now.
Really? I'm
Yes,
glad to be back.
it's been a minute. Yeah, so I'll leave a link in the show notes if people want to check out your first episode. That's when we kind of really got into your story and how you got sober. Um, but we have so much to talk about today because you have a couple of books that we should talk about. We're going to be talking about A Women's Way Through the 12 Steps Workbook. It's the 30th anniversary.
Can you imagine? I wrote A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps in 1994. It sold many, I can't even tell you, 600,000 copies. I mean, a huge enough.
Ooh.
Yeah. And we had a workbook. But now, 30 years later, I thought this book is still selling. But in 30 years, there's language to change. And I
Mhm.
wanted, in that first book, I interviewed a diverse group of women about their experience of recovery and what the steps meant to them and how they use them. But I wanted to include the voices of trans non-binary women. And so I included some new interviews and then updated the language. So we have the new book, the new workbook, and the facilitator guide 30 years later.
That is amazing. I remember had been running women's groups using that book for like probably 20, 25 years, something like that.
Right, right.
And it was what I really liked about it was the language. Like I feel like it's important to meet people where they're at. And all of the traditional 12-step literature is has all the male pronouns. That God
Right.
is always a he, and it's he this and he that. And so I was so rebellious when I actually got sober in 94. So it was written the year I got
Right, right.
sober. I didn't find the book until I had been sober for several years. But I remember going through my 12 and 12 and putting an S in front of the he.
Right.
It was
Well, and
she.
part of what motivated me to write the book is there was my own experience in 12 steps, but then I had clients, women who were struggling and said, well, how can I go to these meetings? All they do is say he and all the literature is he. And I thought, why don't we have something? And when actually would write to World Services and say, when are you going to change this? And about every other year, they vote on whether to get rid of the sexist language and they turn it down every time. So I thought, in my lifetime, it's not going to change. I can do something about this. So I
Yeah,
went to Hazleton with this idea of let's have a book focused on the 12 steps, written the way they are, but with women's experiences,
right.
women's voices. And I think that's what's resonated with women. They can find themselves. They, like you said, meet people where they're at. Well, you have to be able to identify. You have to feel like something resonates with you. And so I think
Absolutely.
that's why the book has had this long history. And it
Yeah.
will continue. It's as viable today as it was then. I just needed freshening up.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those perennial sellers, right? Like women are always, there will always be the next generation of women who come to the conclusion that they need to practice abstinence, and they're looking at the existing programs. And there's a lot of different ways to do it now. But I'm a 12-step diehard. I
Well,
found the process to be so transformative.
well, and that's what the 12 steps offer us. They offer us a way to totally transform our lives because they give us tools for living. Often these are tools we didn't get growing up. We didn't learn them living in the world. And so these tools for living translate for everybody. I mean,
Right.
we use them initially because of our problems with alcohol, other drugs, whatever. But as life goes on, you realize, oh, this works in every aspect of my life, my relationships, my work life. So, yeah, I think they're just universal tools for living.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason why the 12 steps have been adapted to every sort of dysfunctional
Right.
gambling, sex, shopping, workaholism. It's been
Everything.
adapted. They're so
Yes,
flexible.
yes. People have found them useful for all kinds of compulsive behaviors or things that are challenging them in their lives and they just can't manage.
Yeah.
Can't think your way out of it.
No, or figure it out. Like figure it out is not a slogan.
No, I don't figure it out. It's not a slogan.
It's not a slogan for a reason. No, but for me, it was definitely a process to sort of sort out all my baggage and then stabilize my life. What year did you get sober in?
I got sober in 1978.
It's
I,
been a minute.
it's been a minute. It's been a lot of years now, a lot of years.
When you were getting sober and going to meetings, was it like heavily male dominated?
I was living on the East Coast in a suburb of New York City, and there were no women's meetings, none.
It wasn't a thing yet.
No. So it was all co-ed meetings. And so, but the first meeting I went to, the first meeting I went to, I went because I'd had a challenging event that I knew would not have happened except I'd been drinking. So I thought, well, if I go to AA, I'll learn how to drink without having problems. That's what I thought I was going for. I'm
A
in
little
this
bait and
meeting.
switch.
Yeah, right. And there's something happens in the meeting. I start to cry. The man sitting next to me says, I want to introduce you to someone. And he introduces me to a woman in the meeting who becomes my sponsor.
Oh, wow.
So he knew that I needed a woman,
Yeah.
I needed, and so, but we didn't have women's meetings.
Was it commonplace for them? Because nowadays you go to meetings and they say, oh, the men work with the men and the women work with the women. Was that a common
Yes, they
refrain?
said that, but there also was 13 stepping and,
Uh,
where people were using a meeting because they didn't have dating apps in those days. So
that was a place to hook up even then.
exactly, not good. But for me, it were, it was the lifesaver. It was the
Yeah.
life raft, really.
Yeah. And there really wasn't, were there treatment centers at that point?
There were, but I didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't either. Yeah.
It's really funny what you don't know. I realized later that one of my neighbors, or someone said she'd been in a hospital for a while. I didn't think of it. Turns out later she had gone to a treatment program. But of course,
Oh,
the shame, particularly around women,
right.
particularly being an alcoholic in those days, was tremendous. So families hid that. You know,
Right.
they'd rather have you in a psychiatric hospital than an addiction treatment program.
Yeah. They used to call it oh, she had a mental breakdown.
Yes, right.
Like that was less shameful than
That was less shameful.
than I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Why do you suppose, like I've heard you say this before, that it's especially shameful for women. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, we've always had these mixed feelings about women with alcohol and drugs. I mean, do you know until the 1950s, you could not show a photograph or a movie of a woman drinking?
Really?
Huh? Couldn't do that. Well, you don't realize, also in movies, I don't know when it changed, you couldn't show two people in the same bed. They had to be
Right. That was like the Lucille Ball. Remember that
right.
TV?
It's
They
all
had separate beds. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So there were things that were shameful. And
Okay.
women using has always been worse than there's always been shame around addiction on some level. But think about the words that are used. I mean, if a woman is an addict, what do they say about her? She's
Oh,
loose, she's a whore, she's a
yeah.
bad mother,
Right.
she's got all these things. If he's using, he's a bum.
Yeah.
The language is very different when you talk negatively about a woman who's abusing alcohol or drugs or a man abusing alcohol or other drugs. So we have these sort of social mores, social taboos,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. If you look at the history, we knew women were addicts in the 1890s, and they
Mm.
were addicted to medications that were designed for women because we were the weaker sex.
We
And
were
those
hysterical.
right, right, exactly. And the medications were laced with alcohol and opiates. In
Oh
the
my
in
God.
the 1950s and 60s, there were medications designed for women. Barbiturates, tranquilizer, Valium was initially marketed as mother's little helper, right? So
Well, it makes sense now that we have mommy wine culture.
exactly, exactly. So we have mothers having wet play dates where mommies get together and the kids play and the women drink wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a way, it's a mixed bag, right? There's
Yeah.
this, but don't do that. So
Yeah.
now it's okay for women to drink, but heaven forbid you don't get drunk.
Yeah, I was just interviewing a gal who was telling me that she got sober kind of in that new way where she did a lot of online research first
Uh-huh,
and then found sober blogs and
uh-huh,
then Facebook groups and things like that and kind of developed her own little community. And she's like not a coach or anything,
right,
but it was so interesting. There's still like this shame, like she couldn't, like her family was seeing her black out. She told me that she would wake up the next morning and excuse me, her kids would come into the bed. She'd be like, "Oh, those are cute pajamas. Like, I don't remember picking those out." And I was like, "So you're blacking out
right,
and you're
right.
putting your kids to bed." This whole mommy wine culture thing
Yeah.
is really it's very troubling. There's a lot of social media around making light of women drinking.
Well, COVID shows us what for during COVID, a lot of people increased their drinking, but women's increase was astronomical compared to men. Women's increased death rate has increased for women more than men. It's up 15% for women, 12.5% for men. The death rate from alcohol, looking over the period during COVID and the increased use. You know, for years, people said that drinking a small amount of alcohol was good for your health. You know that research?
I know that makes me crazy.
Well, listen, it's all been debunked. It's
Yes.
incorrect.
Yeah.
And so now they realize that even a small amount of alcohol impacts your health. And for women, one drink a day, which is not alcoholism, one drink a day, 7 drinks a week, increases your risk of liver and breast cancer by 9%.
Oof.
So the new research on the impact, because alcohol in particular has a different impact on women's bodies than men, because we have more fat cells and it gets stored in our fat cells. We have less of the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol, so it's more toxic for us. And
Oh,
therefore, the harm for us is greater, even small amounts. There's no amount that's safe.
right.
So you just, you choose your risk. So I'm not saying everybody should stop because it's risky, but you should know the information and decide. It's like sometimes I'm annoyed at putting on my seatbelt. But the risk of being in an accident, something happening to me is less if I'll put on my seatbelt, right?
Yeah.
You have to look at what your risks are. And I worry about my friends who've had breast cancer who continue to drink because
Yeah.
now they're increasing the risk of having another
Like
cancer
a
episode,
reoccurrence.
a reoccurrence. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that old decades saying, oh, well, it's good for health. Turns out, no, the research was flawed.
The
They've gone
research
back
was
and
flawed.
they've gone back and re-looked at over 100 of those studies and said they're flawed.
Are the studies you're referring to, are there studies that are specifically focused on women? Because I know a lot of like when I have a friend that works for pharmaceuticals, and when they do drug testing, they just drug test men. Like women's
Right.
bodies are different. So are these
I
studies
know.
specifically
Well,
focused on
what
women?
this, it's interesting. This particular group that looked at all these old studies,
Mhm.
looked at men and women, but they also separated out the data. So they're
Okay.
looking at also the impact of women and men. And that's why we know that for women, there's greater risk.
Right. And is the medical community updating their information? I feel like the medical community, like they don't really know what they're talking about when it comes to addiction. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I think some know,
Some
some
know.
some know some know a little, and some know none.
Yeah.
And some don't even want to know, quite honestly.
Yeah.
There-
Yeah.
It's not our society has really mixed feelings around addiction.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
yeah, very ambivalent. I mean, we now know more than ever, the research shows that we call it a disease. It's a disease,
Right.
a brain disease because of how it impacts the brain. And the more we learn about it being a disease and a brain disease, the more we incarcerate people who are addicted to alcohol and other drugs. Now, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you send people to treatment not to, treatment in prison, for the most part, is not really good treatment.
No, that's not, I feel like it just adds a layer of trauma onto,
Exactly.
it doesn't really solve anything. It makes things worse.
Yes.
Um, we were talking earlier before we hit record, um, we were talking about treatment
Mhm.
and how there is a lot of new information. I feel like, science has progressed,
Mhm.
psychology has progressed, and there are a lot of alternatives that have come up, which I find really interesting. I'm all about finding a path that works for you. But
Absolutely.
you mentioned something about sort of like what has developed in treatment centers now about the lack of encouraging people to go to AA. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, it's kind of like how a pendulum swing, years and years
Right.
ago, all treatment, the foundation of treatment was 12 steps. And pretty much that's what we had. Now, with the evolution of time, we've learned more about addiction. We have behavioral health master's level people working in treatment. We have people now called peer specialists, often who are in recovery. But what's happened in this course of becoming more professional as a treatment community is some of these programs are not suggesting or offering 12 steps. And so I've asked about this because it doesn't make sense to me. And so sometimes the professionals will tell me, well, we have so much more to offer now. I asked the peer specialists who require, well, I've learned a lot more. Now, we have evidence now. Evidence is coming both out of Harvard from John Riley and also from, if I can remember his name, at Stanford, Keith Humphreys, showing that 12-step programs are as effective, if not more effective, than other types of interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy. So we have research showing that in fact this works. At the same time, we have treatment programs using it less. Makes no sense to me. And as I say to people, okay, but what are you offering when people leave treatment? What are you suggesting they do for a support system in their community? One of the things about 12 steps, it's free, it's readily available in most communities. It offers support and from other people who are maintaining recovery. People need this.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm really surprised and concerned that it's not there's no continuation of seeing this as a really good resource because it's actually the best resource we have.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think what is misunderstood about 12 step is that it's actually based on a lot of ancient wisdom, right? Like the incorporation of a spirituality, not religion, but a
Right.
spirituality, community, especially in this day and age where people are less and less connected. Fewer people are going to church, people are more,
People are
isolated.
isolated. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that it's not encouraged, like prayer meditation, like those are ancient traditions. That's nothing
right.
new.
No, and the 12 steps are really, I consider 12 universal principles for living life.
Yeah,
And it uses language that could be interpreted as Christianity, but nowhere do you need to use that language. They
right.
use the word God. It does not need to be a Christian God. It needs to be some power in the universe greater than you are, period.
Period.
And so it's universal. I just think it's unfortunate. I think we have to let people know what it really is and what people can find there. Because,
Yeah,
you and I both use 12 steps for our recovery because the tools work for recovery.
yeah,
As you go further and further into your recovery, the number of years you have and I have, you find that these tools are useful in every aspect of your life.
100%.
It's not just about recovery. That's where you start. Global. It's global.
Yeah, I think the big missing message is that recovery is like quitting drinking. It's just the beginning.
Oh, yeah. It's just for that first step.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's coming after that. And usually miracles,
Oh,
very
miracles.
transformative.
So transformative. Um, Man, there is so much to unpack there. When you went through the 12 steps yourself, like, you know, did you have to go through, did you grow up with religion and then have to redefine it when you got sober?
I grew up in a Protestant family that went to church. My we were encouraged to go to church. My parents went to church. My sister and I were expected to go to church. We were usually dragging our feet. At one point, my mother said this when I was going to get married. Oh, I'm so glad we chose that church because they have the perfect sanctuary for a wedding. That was that gives you a flavor, right?
Right, right.
So
Wanted it to look good.
looking good was important.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that was particularly foundational in my life at all. I found that when I went to college, I took a course on religions of the world because I was curious,
Mhm.
and interested. But for a lot of my life, there wasn't anything. But coming into the 12 steps and the whole idea of spirituality and connection, and then I became very intrigued actually with Buddhism, and I love Southeast Asian countries.
Mhm.
And that resonated with me. Um, s- so whatever went on in my childhood is long gone.
Yeah, I really love that idea of just being able to come up with something that makes sense to you.
Yes,
It's very much a take what you like, leave the rest kind of program.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
there's really no need to get hung up on anything because if you don't like it, you just, set it aside
Something
and
else.
keep it moving. My girlfriend always says, keep it moving.
I had a client one time that was major, a nurse who was addicted to prescription drugs that she was taking from the hospital. Um, a lot of issues in her life. She couldn't 12-step meetings were difficult for her, the idea of higher power, but she was a swimmer. And so one day I said to her, when you're swimming, who has more power, you or the ocean? She said, well, always the ocean. I said, why don't you make the ocean your higher power? It's a power. She said, I can do that. Because she'd had that physical experience of being immersed in something where the power was greater than her.
Wow. Yeah.
And so her higher power became the ocean. So it can be whatever.
It can be whatever. I think the point is to, set aside this idea of control and maybe open up to the idea that there's help, right? Like we don't have to do it all on our own. But I think those ideas that I feel like those of us that didn't grow up with parents that were super attentive to our emotional needs,
Mhm.
we sort of were conditioned to figure it out and figure it out by ourselves and to isolate. Like when I was acting out as a, child, I was isolated, like go have your feelings over there and figure it out. And so when as an adult, when I experience emotional distress,
Mhm.
I my tendency is to want to isolate,
Ah,
right? But this idea, and so the 12 steps sort of reintroduced me to this idea that help is available.
right. And isolation doesn't solve anything really. And there's a difference between solitude, being in a quiet space, reflective, and
Mm,
isolation. And
yeah.
isolation, no, not good
I,
for us.
I feel like my isolation was, and still to this day, if I feel overwhelmed, my instinct is to want to go watch Netflix or stare at my phone for an unreasonable amount of time. But it's like this relief. It's like a little bit of a escapism,
Mhm.
right? But what kinds of tools did you receive in 12 step that replaced sort of those unhealthy coping skills?
I think one of the first ones really was having a sponsor, someone I had a lot of friends.
Yeah.
Many I drank with. Turns out none of them were alcoholic the way I was, and they were shocked when I said I'm alcoholic and I'm stopping drinking. It was like,
Oh, were they?
oh, we were all major social drinkers,
Okay.
upper middle class suburbs of New York. Drinking was
Yeah.
part of our hobby. You know, um, But now I had a woman in my life, a sponsor I could say anything to.
Yeah.
And that was a huge, huge change. Um, because I realized I really monitored what I even said to friends.
Yeah.
You know, I was cautious about certain things. So I was given that. I think the idea that there was always a place to go.
Hmm.
While there weren't women's meetings, there were lots of meetings
Yeah.
every night. Um, I think also the possibility, I was in the beginning, like I said, I didn't go to stop drinking. I went to drink better.
Yeah.
And
Drink like a lady.
yeah, exactly. And um, and listening to people tell their stories and realize they were managing their lives, many of them far more complicated than mine,
Mm.
without alcohol or drugs. That was really intriguing to me,
Yeah.
you know, and gave me hope. If they could do it, I could do it. My
Yeah.
challenges were less. I should be able to do this. And I
Yeah.
love the idea of one day at a time.
Yes,
I
as you
mean,
know.
that's a wonderful concept,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
to think about the year, 5 years, 10 years, that would have been really not okay.
Right.
Can you do it for today? Yeah,
Just today.
I can do it for today.
Yeah. There were some days that was just like 1 hour at a time, especially if
Exactly.
I felt like super triggered.
Hmm.
Um, I was curious about, your perspective. So you've been sober a long time. You've worked with a lot of women, is an understatement. What do you recommend for somebody who is just starting out? Like, what can they expect? How can they expect to feel the first, couple weeks, maybe 30 days, 100 days? What can they expect in the early days?
You know, it's really different. I mean, for some women, they feel remarkably wonderful, but there are other women where it's really a struggle,
Yeah.
really a struggle. And I think that the issue is you have to decide, okay, what do you want to try to do? And I really, I used to clients who were very reluctant. I'd say, just do this for 30 days, one day at a time and see what it feels like. Because and what I said to people is, I can guarantee you your life will be better without alcohol. And I said, I'm not a gambler, but I would bet on this. And they would look at me, really? I said, yeah, I know. It will get better. So for some women, there's increased anxiety.
Hmm.
There's a lot of fear involved because this has been their best friend in a way. It's been their
I
coping
know.
mechanism.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to figure out, okay, how am I going to cope without this? What is it do I need? Do I need a couple of grounding exercises to use if I get triggered or get activated? Um, I think, and also knowing you don't know exactly how you're going to feel. Um, I find slowing down those first 30, 60, 90 days, just slow down, stay focused on what you want to accomplish today. I want to live today without alcohol or other drugs.
Like making it a priority.
You have to make it a priority and you have to be thoughtful because if you're not being thoughtful, automatic pilot is to use.
Right.
So you have to be thoughtful. No, I'm not doing that. No, I'm choosing this. And
Yeah.
you have to slow down to do that. So if
Right.
you're living at a fast pace, you need to know you're not going to be able to live at that same pace in those first early weeks or months of recovery, because this needs to be your focus.
Right.
And you have to be paying attention to what's coming at you and how you're responding, you know.
Yeah. I find that one of the triggers that I see is stress, right? And so having a plan to handle the stress, and the stress can be, I read something recently that really has stuck with me is this idea that alcohol raises your baseline of cortisol when you're not drinking. And I think that's why anxiety is sometimes increased in the beginning because their body is trying to return cortisol to a lower
Normal
baseline,
level, right?
a normal level. So in the beginning, there's an increase in anxiety and there's a little bit of boredom Boredom
right?
was I've heard like boredom
Oh,
is
yeah,
another trigger.
not exciting. That means because you're not having a crisis.
Yeah, I also heard that it takes your brain a little bit of time to heal from the flood of dopamine that
Yes,
you've been hammering your brain with. And so the when you stop drinking and you're not consuming so much dopamine, it translates to the experience of boredom, like probably at like 2 weeks.
right. It flattens everything out. It's a, it's funny if you and I are, well, let's say we break our leg and they cast our leg and they say, you have to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to take you a month or two to recover. We would do that without thinking. We'd slow
Right.
down. We'd know we couldn't go as fast because we had a broken leg. We
Yeah.
would know that we needed to elevate our leg. We would
Yeah.
change our life for the period of our bone healing. And we
Yeah.
wouldn't argue about it, right? We wouldn't, would we?
No,
No,
no.
not at all. We would say, oh, okay. But
Yeah.
when it comes to recovery and slowing down, and doing these things, we're like, oh no, oh no. But it's the same, it's about healing. It's about
Yeah.
allowing your body to heal,
Yes.
restabilize. And that means eating good food, it means getting some rest. It's doing some of these things because your body needs to move into a healing mode. And we
Yeah.
would do that for anything else. But for this, we resist.
We do. I think it's because it's like one of those invisible things,
Mhm.
right? Like, you break your leg, that's a forced
Right.
slowdown, right? But I think we're tempted to think that we are more okay than we actually are. Like, I see people, I think one of the mistakes I see, I wonder if you see this too, people trying to take on too much in early, like, okay, I'm going to exercise every day. I'm going to only eat chicken and broccoli I'm going to lose some weight. It's too much.
Right. I'll set up every meeting I go to and make the coffee. I'll call 12 newcomers. You have to think about yourself being in a body cast.
Right. Yeah. It really is. You got to
Yeah.
slow down a little bit.
Slow down.
Yeah. That's really good. Um, how do you feel about, like, the landscape has changed so much since you wrote the book? There's a lot of social medias, peer support kind of stuff. I have mixed feelings about that myself. I see some people, I get reports, people say that it's helpful to talk to strangers and they can't talk to their family just yet. What kind of things have you taken from, all the things, the progress that we've made and put into your book? What's new in the book?
Well, you know, uh, what's new in the book are the new, certain, the most obvious things, obviously, are the new interviews with the trans non-binary women.
Oh, right.
And I also want to, I didn't know what I would get in those interviews, but because I thought, I wonder how it's been for them to go to women's meetings. Have they been accepted? To a
Yeah.
person, they were totally accepted.
Yeah.
And they talked about it. And I think that's another thing that, just think in life, how many places can you be different and go someplace and be totally accepted?
Yeah.
That speaks to the philosophy embedded in the meetings. But the other thing is this idea that I really do think that everyone has to find their own path.
Yeah.
For us, it was the 12 steps. I encourage women to read this even if they're doing dry January,
Hmm.
or if they talk about learning to be, sober conscious, that kind of thing. So
Right.
I think it's hearing what other women say about their experience. I think that's really the most important thing. In terms of online things, I think the programs and the things that are online with She Recovers are good,
Yeah.
very good. I think there are other things online that are marginal.
Hmm.
I'm afraid women won't get sufficient help, but I think it's important for women to know there is help out there.
Right.
And there's help out there in a variety of different ways in different places. You just want to be sure you're getting help that's well grounded and safe.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. I think peer support definitely has a place. I think the thing that
absolutely.
concerns me is people that are brand new sober, starting coaching businesses and things like that.
not a good plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking online and someone is new in recovery and doing a coaching business and you want to coach, find someone who's got a minimum of 5 years.
A minimum of 5.
Mhm,
Okay. That's a
mhm.
good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Yeah, because not that the person that has 90 days can't be helpful, but in terms of the depth of their experience and the depth of their knowledge and the range that they can offer you, why not get it from somebody who's has a bigger tool chest?
Yeah. When I first got sober and I was looking for a sponsor, I was looking for I looked for women that almost were like a motherly figure.
Mhm,
Someone
mhm.
that made me feel safe and who had
Right,
lots of years of experience, who had been through relationships and raised kids and been married a long time. They say to look for someone who has what you want, and they
exactly.
weren't professionals, but they were coming from this perspective of, well, this is what I did, try this,
A
run
depth
the
of knowledge,
experiment.
a depth of
Yeah,
knowledge and experience. That's what you
yeah,
need when you're new.
yeah. And we should probably talk about trauma because a lot of addiction has underlying trauma. I know not everybody has it, but like I myself had a fair amount of trauma, which I think, shaped my sense of self-esteem and what I felt like I deserved. And it just kind of led me down this negative spiral. And so it was good for me to have peer support in the form of a sponsor, but I needed professional help for my trauma.
Right. Yeah, and I think what we've learned over the years is the majority of women who have some kind of addictive disorder, majority of them have had some kind of trauma in their life, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, something, right?
Yeah.
And often in meetings, it doesn't feel like the best place to talk about that, certainly not in a co-ed meeting. And
Mm-mm.
so very often people need other kinds of help for that, additional help. And certainly there are people who can provide that and understand the connection between trauma and addiction. And that's one of the things that early treatment programs didn't provide. Early on, when I started working in the field, the word trauma was not used.
Oh, it wasn't.
Never used. No, was never used. Then we went to the next stage, which was there was an acknowledgement. Yeah, most of the men and women in treatment have had some kind of trauma. That was the total sum total of the description. Then the next thing that happened is a mantra was developed in the treatment field, and it was this: when you've been clean and sober for a year, then you can work on your trauma,
They
which meant
the
take,
thinking was that they needed to stabilize the
they
addiction
need to be
first.
stabilized and basically don't bring it here. Somebody else will deal with it later. I've always said it was really good for the counselors. But today we know that for many people, they can't get a year of recovery until they're also working on their trauma because of that
Yeah,
linkage I mentioned. So, um, but still not all treatment programs are dealing with trauma, but it is an important piece, and it's important for women to know these are often linked.
right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so that getting help for both may be what you need.
Maybe we should define what trauma is because I feel like the pendulum has swung all the way to the other side from like not even acknowledging trauma to like everything is a trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma.
It's amazing. It's scary,
Yeah.
quite honestly, and it is a
Is it?
pendulum swing.
Yeah.
Years ago in the 80s, where we had sort of this big recovery movement, everybody was addicted to something. I even had a woman call me on the phone, say, my friends say I need to work on my addiction. I said, well, explain it to me. She ate a Hershey bar every day at her desk at 3 o'clock. And I said, well, that might be a habit, but that's not necessarily an addiction. And its impact on your family, friends, and society is pretty limited. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that was everybody's an addict. That's what we have now with trauma.
Okay.
I have friends running agencies where a staff member will call and say, I just missed the bus to work. I've just been traumatized. I can't come to work.
Are you
I
serious?
am serious. I've got a better one for you. How about this? A friend of mine is this last Thanksgiving is a Thanksgiving table. Her sister says to her nephew, asks him to do something. He says, I can't, I've been triggered. She looks at him and says, do you know what it means? And she said, where did you learn it? He said, I learned it in school. It means you don't have to do something.
All you have to say is I've been triggered. Yeah.
So that's where things are out of whack.
Okay.
A trauma is what happens when someone experiences an event that overwhelms their capacity to cope physically and psychologically.
Okay.
And it has to have some impact, not just initially, which is an acute traumatic response, but over time.
Okay.
And it's some kind of missing the bus is not a traumatic experience.
It
Okay.
sucks, but it's not traumatic.
Right. It's stressful and it's irritating, but
Yeah.
trauma it is not. And
Right.
so we have trivialized trauma
Right.
in our wanting to understand and do more. And so what I've been trying to explain to treatment providers in particular, and they say, well, we can't do this work because it triggers people. I said, wait a minute. The work is helping people understand the concept of triggers so they know what's happening and giving them coping skills so they can manage their triggers. It's not taking all the triggers away. You can't take all the triggers away.
Mm-mm.
The world is filled with them, and a trauma survivor actually never knows what might become a trigger over years. So
Right.
it's learning, how do you manage? How do you understand the concept and then be able to say to yourself, oh, I've been triggered. Now I need to do deep breathing. Now I need to, whatever it is that are the tools, the self-soothing tools you have is what's important.
I get it. So it is an acknowledgement that you're dysregulated emotionally, but
Yep.
the responsibility is still on you for managing it, as
Yeah.
opposed to saying, I have trauma or I've been triggered. I don't have to do anything.
Right.
It's an absolution of responsibility rather than
Right.
an,
Right.
okay, that makes
It's
sense.
just another level of responsibility, like in some ways, so, okay, addiction is a disease. Well,
Right.
you have it. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Right. It's not your
You know,
fault, but it's your
but
responsibility.
it's your responsibility to take care of this, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the same thing with trauma. It doesn't mean now you don't have to go to work, or you don't have to go to school, or you don't have to take this class, or you don't have to read this book, or all these things. What we're doing is we're infantilizing people,
Yes.
totally infantilizing them.
Right. Yeah, that we're not actually teaching. I mean, life is hard. We need to teach
Life
people how
is
to.
hard,
Life is so hard sometimes.
right? We have
Yeah,
to give people tools for living in a world that's difficult, really
yeah.
difficult.
I just was having a conversation with a client yesterday. She and I are both in long-term recovery, and we both had a fair amount of, I had sexual abuse as a child, and she had, her own thing. And it was what I got in our conversation yesterday was I think she was having this expectation of like, when am I going to be better? And I've had that too, where I'm like, wow, am I still getting triggered where I feel emotionally dysregulated? I have judgment against my own res like my own response to things that seems to be out of my control. I feel like that, like my response to having a feeling is the problem, not the actual feeling.
I don't know if you've ever seen that I use spirals a lot in my work.
Do
And
you?
I use the downward spiral to talk about what happens with addiction.
Okay.
Women are caught in a downward spiral. The line through the middle of the spiral is the optic of addiction. They organize their life around it. It's constricting. Same thing
Right.
with trauma. Organize your life around trauma. Your life becomes more and more and more limited. Healing from trauma, recovery from addiction is an upward spiral. And the line through the middle represents addiction, trauma. It never goes away. Every powerful life experience stays with us all of our lives. It's the nature of life.
Yeah.
And healing is possible. And how we think about that is that even thinking about addiction, the years you have, the years I have, there are times in my life where it's on way back here. I don't think about it, it's gone. And then sometimes it'll come into the foreground. I can be on an airplane, all this years of recovery. Flight attendant says, would you like a glass of wine? And I go to say yes. And I think, you haven't had a drink in 40 some years. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
there. So we have to realize sometimes these events are in the foreground of our life, sometimes they're in the background. But in an upward spiral, you come back to the same place over and over again, but on a different level.
On a
So
different level.
healing is not about it being gone.
Right.
Recovery isn't about it being gone. It's that when it comes back around, you're on a different level. And then you go around and you come and you're in a different level. And now it's on a
Yeah.
different level. And so it's with trauma work, it's not about it being gone.
Right.
It's about you're working on it again from a slightly different place, on a different level. Um,
Yeah, and I had sort of a different spin on it for her when I was like, you know what, but it's your, she's a medical doctor. And I was like, it actually is your superpower because you are in tune, she is especially sensitive to certain things that other doctors would miss,
mm,
right? She's like sensitive because she has like sort of this
it's great.
do you know what I mean? So it can be, yeah, it's a bitch sometimes when it's like, wow, really? Again? I'm like, I get triggered by like workaholism stuff occasionally. And I'm
Right.
like, give too much, burn out. And then I'm like watching Netflix for too long. And I was like, oh, how'd that happen? But but I have some practices that, like prayer, meditation, journaling,
Exactly.
all that stuff. What other tools might you recommend? You mentioned grounding exercises. What do those look like?
Well, grounding exercises are the things that people can use if they've been triggered and pushed back in time. So the emotional dysregulation. So the feelings belong back here, but you're
Right.
experiencing them today. So it's really kind of odd,
Yeah.
for the experience. So what you want is a grounding exercise that gets you into the here and now.
Okay.
And so there are a couple of them, and we teach really simple ones. Here's one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That simple thing focuses someone right in this moment. They're breathing exercises, focusing on the breath.
Mm,
The five senses activity, where you name to yourself 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. See, so all these are about being in the here and now. I could
mm,
sit here if I was triggered and think, okay, say my name, the address where I'm sitting, the number of windows in the room, the number of people I'm talking to, the date, everything about the moment, the color of the walls, the shape of my
okay.
ring light. It's just focusing right in the here and now. And
Right.
that brings comfort because it gets someone out of the past where they are stuck emotionally now and brings them
Right.
right into this moment. And there is that sense of, oh, now I have some things I can do when this happens. It becomes a tool.
Okay.
And that's a sense of empowerment when I have tools that I can use to manage myself.
Yeah. Those are all really good. Yeah, it's true. I've heard that saying that if it's hysterical, it's historical. Like, if I recognize that my response is disproportionate to the
Right.
situation, that's a sign that it's not has nothing to do with what's actually
Exactly.
happening. It's
Right. So
unresolved.
then, yeah, I have women, okay, you're having a feeling and you ask yourself, does the feeling match the situation? No. How old do you feel you are as you're having this feeling? I feel 9. What was happening when you were 9?
Ooh,
Were you angry about something when you were 9 that you couldn't express your anger?
right. And so do you start to reframe? I've seen that a lot in like internal family systems.
Mhm.
That seems like a quicker way to,
So simple, these
yeah,
are, I try to take theoretical concepts and make them simple.
simple. Yeah,
Simple, so it's things people can do and understand,
right. Yeah,
and
so
helps you make sense of your
very
life.
practical.
Very practical, helps you make sense of your life. Because all of
Yeah,
a sudden, if I can figure out where this feeling belongs,
yeah. Yeah.
Really tells
Are
me so.
are you familiar with internal family systems?
Some,
Yeah, I mention it because when you were talking about, how old is this feeling? Like, how old were you when you had this feeling? It's like there's this idea that there's, I don't know if trauma is the right word, but you had like an emotional experience,
Mhm.
and how old were you when you had that? It's like, what does that little 9-year-old do? Like, how can you help her process that feeling to resolution?
Exactly.
So that
And let
she's
her
not
know there's
pregnant.
someone here for her now.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's difficult is, this idea we all have an inner child, and it's difficult when as adults in our adult lives, we're acting like a child. It's not particularly flattering usually.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly. So being able to deal with her,
Yeah.
is useful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have found that it's easier for me to do that work with a facilitator. But if you're sort of in crisis, a few simple questions to get you grounded so that
Right,
you can get through the moment
right,
without doing any damage to yourself or others.
right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are really good grounding exercises. I'll have to write those out and put them in the show notes. Are they in the book?
Those would be in different books. We can certainly send them to you if you'd like them. We even have a book called, what's it called? The Stress Reduction Booklet that has probably 35 different activities in it.
Wow, that's amazing.
All
I
all
feel like,
ground, all grounding and self-soothing. And you'll find that if you go on the website,
okay.
www.stephaniecovington.com, you'll see all the materials that are available. So you'll see A Woman's Way and all that and Hidden Healers, but you'll see the stress reduction booklet. And I think it's $15 and it's got 35, 40 different exercises that are all about grounding and self-soothing.
That is so important. I get that a lot with women that I'm working with that are just quitting. It's like, oh, I used to rely on alcohol to help me
Right.
relax or calm down. It's like, what do I do instead?
That's why
Well,
we have this.
yeah, that's a bargain. 15 bucks.
Yeah,
How much is a bottle of wine these days?
exactly. More than that. Well, it depends if it has a screw top or not.
Listen, those of us that are snobs would be spending a lot more than 15
Right,
bucks.
exactly.
Yeah. And it's not, and we were talking earlier about, it's we, we don't have to do this alone, but
No,
sometimes you do need to have skills for when
you
you
need
are
tools for
alone.
when you're alone. Absolutely.
Yeah. People are
Absolutely.
not always available. I think it's really important to develop a support network. I think that another reason 12-step communities are so great.
Right.
Part of the 12-step program, step 12 is, being of service, carrying this message to others. And that was a way for me to rebuild my self-esteem that was so damaged by this experience of addiction. Service was probably, and so you can go to these rooms where people are like dying to help you out.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, and I need to circle back, you asked if it was in the book. It's not, those exercises are not in the actual little book, but they're in the workbook.
in the
Workbook also
workbook.
has a lot of grounding, different exercises that are in this. The stress reduction booklet has some, as I said, 30, 40, I don't remember how many. And then they're also in the workbook for Woman's Way. They have grounding, different ones. So there's a lot of options for stress reduction, grounding, self-soothing, because it's critical. It's absolutely, we have one exercise where we ask the women to think of the things that could be self-soothing that they can do alone or with others,
Okay.
daytime, and alone or with others in nighttime, so that they
Oh.
start creating a chart for themselves to remind themselves what tools they have.
Yeah, I think it's so important to recognize your triggers, like and plan for them ahead of time.
Yep, yep, because they're gonna
And
come.
yeah, a lot of them are so predictable. Like around the holidays, people, family
Yeah,
family members are a problem. But also like just social events, where people are
right.
walking into social events where everyone's drinking, relationships, stress. I feel like stress is ultimately
It's
the,
huge.
the biggest trigger.
Yeah,
So knowing what's going to trigger that stress and having a plan for it will help you stay sober. Quitting's not the
exactly.
hard part, staying sober is.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
That's awesome. Well, I could talk to you all day, but I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, and
Good,
I really appreciate your time. I'll leave links to your website and, of
great.
course, the books in the show notes. But man, when I saw you at the She Recovers event, you were receiving an award that night, and I just wonder, what is it like to be you're standing on 30 years of serving women in people. You know what I mean? What does that feel like?
Um, it's all kinds of things. One, it's kind of shocking, because I never thought when I first walked in to a meeting to get sober that this would be where I would be.
Right.
Um, a lot of gratitude, to be able to do work that I love.
Yeah.
What could be more valuable, So it's been um, I'm grateful, very grateful. And, it transformed my life.
Yeah.
And I would hear people say, getting to recover is the best thing that happened to me. And I think, oh, you kidding me? What's wrong with you? I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a good wake up call.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About living a life that's meaningful.
Purpose and meaning. Yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, what could be more purposeful than, I mean, listen, we're saving people's lives,
Right.
and the mothers that get sober, they're better mothers. They're preventing their kids from experiencing neglect and abuse. And
Right.
it's just, I mean, when you heal a woman, you heal a family.
Family. Exactly.
Yeah, it's having such a huge impact.
Mm.
Well, listen, thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
And I've enjoyed our time together. So perhaps we'll do it again and not wait 250 more episodes.
I know. Yeah. And we still didn't talk about the hidden helpers
Hidden
book.
healers, hidden
Oh,
healers.
hidden. I can't read my own writing. See, I'm so vain. I'm gonna put my glasses
Yeah,
on.
well, I'll tell you quickly. Hidden
Okay.
Healers is really, it's a book about women in prison. I interviewed women formerly incarcerated, and it reflects my experience of talking my way into a prison at the end of the 80s in North Carolina for a few days, and it changed my life.
Wow.
And I knew working with women in prison was going to be a really important piece because I realized so many of them are there because of addiction to alcohol and other drugs
Yeah.
and trauma.
Yeah.
And so this is a book about how women survive prison, and they do it because they help each other. And so it's stories of women who have nothing, who have so little, and yet they still give to others. And we can all learn from that.
Those stories will be amazing. Well, I'll leave links to all the books in your
Right.
website in the show notes. But thank you
Thanks.
so much for your time today.
Thanks. I've enjoyed it.